Davis. I'm the Wasatch and Summit County Extension Agent. I cover all things horticulture, gardening, urban farming, all that good stuff. But basically what we do is take research-based information and then make it available to the people in our county through classes, fact sheets, home consultations, all the different things. So if you ever have questions or know of anyone who does, send them to me. And the great thing is, if I don't know something, we have a ton of specialists at USU, so we can get you the information. So I'm here as a connection and a resource of information. But today we want to talk about raspberry pruning, and I'll talk about blackberries as well. And raspberry pruning you usually want to do after at least half the leaves have fallen off in the fall. You can also do it, anytime throughout winter or early spring before they start growing again. And the main reason that we prune raspberries is that they are a perennial crop, perennial meaning they grow every year. They'll come up from the crown root and grow up every year, but the canes themselves, each of these individual canes is what we call them, they are actually a biennial, so they only live for 2 years. And that's true for both raspberries and blackberries. And there's 2 different classifications for raspberries, which is really important when you're pruning or even choosing raspberries for our climate. So we have a very short growing season. We have pretty harsh winters too. So with the raspberries and blackberries, there's what's called primocane and floricane. So let's see if I can find an example. So this one, you can see that we have old flower clusters that turned into berries this year. So this is a second year cane. There's another one. This one doesn't have any flower clusters, so it's a first year cane.
So what is a flower cluster?
So right here you can see these dried brown. That's where the berry was pulled off and where the flower used to be.
And so if it doesn't have berries, if it didn't have berries, it was
a first year cane. Yeah. So this is a floricane second year, primocane first year. And summer bearing raspberries, those will bloom on second year canes and they'll flower and fruit on second year. Fall bearing raspberries bloom on first year canes. So it's kind of important to remember the difference. Fall bearing are really hard for us to grow here because they do grow on that first cane, which is great, but it usually starts fruiting later in the year when we start getting frost. So only the top third might actually produce fruit that year. With summer bearing, you can get all of your production done before you even start having frost issues. So I usually recommend choosing those summer bearing raspberries because you'll get more fruit every year with those.
Is it really obvious when you go to the nursery? They're like summer bearing, fall bearing?
They usually have it on the tag. If they don't, I would hope that the retailer could tell you. If not, you can also just Google the name and say, summer or fall bearing, and you should be able to pull it up from a different site. So, yeah. But summer bearing are usually great. They're a little more winter hardy. A lot of the fall bearing ones will die back quite a bit. They're not as hardy, so that's another reason I would pick summer bearing for our area. But
if you don't know, so Nicole doesn't know what variety of raspberries she has.
Okay.
So is there a way for her to have a best guess as to what she's got, summer bearing or fall bearing?
Yes. So it's a little bit easier to tell in the spring, but like I mentioned, if you have canes that have no fruit, like it'll be a bright green color in the spring, and if it doesn't fruit that year, then it's most likely a summer bearing. Once the second year, they get quite woody like this. So, and if it fruits on the second year cane, then it's most likely a summer bearing. So,
could you also tell just by like when you have berries, if it's during the summer or the fall time?
Yeah, so like mine will, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
So mine, like right in September, the end of August, we're hit heavy with berries.
Okay.
So it's not like too late, but I mean, we just get a ton of berries right towards the end. But it wasn't until like a few years ago that we started getting more berries on our plants.
Yeah, it takes a few years for production to build up. You have to get a larger crown that can support the berry yields. Yeah. So that sounds like a fall bearing if it's that late. Like yours were in July.
Yeah.
Here, so
yours are earlier, aren't they?
Mine were like late June to like even with the first frost, I was still picking berries.
Okay, so that sounds like it's probably a summer bearing then if it was a little bit earlier. Usually August, September is when the fall ones start. But again, if you have fruit on a really bright green cane, that's fall bearing because it's fruiting on that first year cane. So.
And we have friends that have fall bearing, and they pick them the first week of October usually.
Yeah.
Is when theirs all are on.
When they're on. And then, so I'll just let you finish telling us what to do with the plants.
Okay. Yeah, and then once we get into blackberries, it kind of breaks down even more the categories. So over here, we have the trailing blackberry, and then these, it's a little hard for me to tell. I think these are semi-erect, meaning they stand up for the most part on their own, but they do tend to kind of droop over to the side like that. So that looks more like a semi-erect. Erect blackberries usually look similar to this. So that kind of breaks it down even more. I will say that the semi-erect have a better hardiness for cold temperatures. They also have had way higher yields in Utah compared to the trailing and erect ones. So
do they have like semi-erect raspberry bushes versus erect
Nope.
raspberries?
So raspberries are just, yeah, more like this shape is standard, but blackberries do vary a little bit more. So let's see, so those are the two different types. And then let's see, as far as just general care, they're pretty similar in what they like. They like a soil that's pretty acidic, so 6.5 to 7 is what they prefer. Our average pH acidity is 7.3 to 8, so it helps if you can drop your pH a little bit. They also require quite a bit of nitrogen, and we recommend adding nitrogen every year. If you have lower cane yields than you did the previous year, then you want to add like the higher rate of nitrogen. We recommend 3 to 5 pounds of urea or ammonium sulfate every year. And so if you have like high cane yields that year, the next spring you could do the low rate of 3. If you have low cane yields that year, the next spring I would do 5. So you kind of have to gauge it by the growth.
That's per bush, so you could get some urea.
Yeah, that's per 100 feet of row, sorry. So it's pretty small amount for that big of an area. But
will that tell us on the bag?
It goes a long way.
Yeah.
Like,
I just put mine on the scale, and it's like the tiniest
where
amount.
we get the chicken food at the
okay.
over by the Silver Eagle, they have like you just shovel it out of this big bin in a bucket.
Sounds like I could kill my plant with that too.
yeah, so for urea, I usually do the lower rate because it is, so if you look at the 3 numbers, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Our soils are very high in phosphorus and potassium. I've not seen a single soil test come through that's had low levels of that. So we usually just recommend nitrogen for that reason. But that urea is a 4500, so it has a very high percentage of nitrogen. The ammonium sulfate, I prefer that one because we typically are low in sulfur. So that can help with that as well. It's also, I think, like 2500 is what I usually use. So you can apply that one at a higher rate. So just based on those 2 numbers. But if you have more questions on that, I'd be happy to talk about it more. We also have fact sheets that I can send all of you that will detail all of this information and even a few things I might miss too. So it's great to refer to that. But it always helps to have a hands-on, in-person experience, I think.
And this spray, you just kind of sprinkle the...
Yeah, you can just sprinkle it around and then water it in. And I usually do that in spring because usually...
It'll waste it. It just like...
Yeah, you want to apply it when the plant needs it. So spring, early summer, that's a great time. As far as watering, I start out with 1 to 2 inches a week. You never want to drench your raspberries. They will die back if they're waterlogged for more than 24 hours. They just can't handle that. They also have a fairly shallow root zone. So I water like twice a week, 1 to 2 inches. And then once you start getting fruit production, you might have to increase that because it's the heat of summer, you're losing more water. but also a lot of water is going into those berries to help them form, and you'll get larger berries with a little more water. So, and that's something you'll have to gauge as well, just depending on your soil, whether it really holds on to water like a clay or sand, and which would fully drain the water. So just kind of gauge it. Let's see. As far as light, they like 8 hours of full sunlight, but you can also see some burning on the leaves. Sometimes we'll get a burnt appearance. The fruit can also sunburn. So if you're getting white fruit, or even just white sections on the fruit, that's sunburn. And the fruit is just heating up, frying. It usually doesn't taste as good, doesn't look as good. A couple of things you can do is allow your rows to be a little bit thicker. I usually recommend, I think 1.5 to 2 feet for raspberry row width. And then blackberries can get a little bit thicker, I think 3 to 4 feet. So, but that will help to shade the fruit. You can also buy shade cloth, and you could just, somehow attach it with poles over the area or something as well, and that would help prevent sunburn. But yeah, we just have that high elevation climate, intense light. Okay, do you have any other questions on general care? Then I'll get into pruning.
Not that I can think of.
A silly question.
Oh, go ahead.
So if they need a lot of sun, but they need shade, I'm not
Yes.
not understanding that very well.
There's a couple different ways to look at light. There's light intensity and then light duration. So we need that 8-hour duration, just because they are sensitive to day length. But as far as light intensity, we get way more light than we need, because we're at like 5,500 elevation right here. So just that higher elevation, way more intense light, which can lead to that sunburn effect. So yeah, but that's a great question though. Thank you. Not silly at all.
Would you recommend like what side of the house to put them on? East versus south versus west
I
or
would
north?
avoid north. That's usually a little too shaded. But versus east and west, I haven't seen a huge difference. You said west didn't work very well for you.
When we tried it, it was too hot. I felt like
Okay.
west.
Yeah.
Mine's on west. Mine are on the west side of my house, so they only get from mid-afternoon down,
Okay.
and I get some sunburn spots on mine.
Yeah. So
But I'm not moving them.
yeah, maybe east would be better, because you get that less intense light at the beginning of the day might be a little bit helpful. Another thing to consider is wind damage. We get some pretty harsh winds blowing through here, and that can damage during the summer. It can damage during the winter as well. So you get a lot of winter dieback from high winds. So where they're up against the house, they have this fencing to block wind that can also help to prevent any damage there too. So great questions. Okay, so I'll talk about pruning unless anyone else has other questions.
Well, I just wondered about like initial planting,
Yeah.
depth and things.
Okay, so initial planting, if you're buying them in containerized pots, just match the level of soil. And I usually plant 1.5 to 2 feet apart for raspberries. Blackberries, I go a little bit farther, like even that 4 foot, 3 foot spacing works. But they will fill in. You can see that these have already suckered and grown across. Raspberries produced by suckers. So the roots have gone over here and now they're producing a new cane. So we can, cut these back, dig them out, and just encourage suckers within the row, and it'll kind of fill itself out naturally. Blackberries are a little bit different. So with the trailing ones, those form by just adding more canes like near the crown. With the semi-erect types, all of these tips that touch the ground, those can form new plants as well. So you could even just spread one of those side canes along the ground and it would root in. You could put a little soil over it and you would get new plants all along.
You plant the tip of the branch?
Yep. Yeah.
Do
so
you
could
cut
just
the
bend
branch,
it over?
or you just pull it over and plant it,
You could just pull it over and stick it in the soil, or put a little mound of soil over it.
and then it starts growing more out?
Yep.
That's crazy. But it's still connected to the mother.
Yeah, and you could even sever that connection after it has roots, and
Once
it'll
it
be
started
just fine.
Going,
Yeah.
going.
So yeah, there's a few difference there. It looks like we do have some cane or some suckers that have grown up from the roots too, but yeah, a couple differences. Let's see, but as far as between row spacing, you usually want to start out wider than you think, because you have to account for how wide your row is going to be. So usually, like, I would say at least 6 to 8 feet for raspberries and up to like 8 feet for blackberries. They need a little bit more space. You can see it's just a bigger plant in general. But yeah, good question though. Thank you. Another thing to talk about really quick is mulch is great. Keeps water in, prevents weeds from growing. And I do prefer drip tape, which it looks like you have drip hose here. So that's usually best if you have overhead irrigation. Anytime you get water on the leaves or the fruit, that can just promote disease and other issues as well. So with the drip irrigation, you can get it right in the root zone. It's usually more efficient with water too. So saving water, saving yourself money. Yeah, I think that's everything. I might come up with more, but if you guys have questions, let me know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I've got a 4x6 box.
Okay.
And we just started with 3 at the very back, 3
Yeah.
big hardy roots
Mhm.
that my son-in-law gave us. And that whole box is full now.
Oh yeah.
So am I wanting to pull everything back out and start back at the big root, or?
You said it's 4x6.
So it's not very big,
Yeah.
but it's loaded.
Okay.
Do you want no raspberries or lots of raspberries?
I know, does it make a difference on the quality of raspberry if it's that thick and dense?
It can. So it might limit your airflow to the plant. So if it does rain or something, you might get more disease issues with that. Another thing to consider is light. So if you have a really thick row, like even this is pretty thick for raspberries, any leaves on the inside might not get enough light. You might get poor fruit production. So maybe towards the center, you might not get enough yield, depending on how thick it is. So that's something to consider too, but that's great. Thank you. But yeah, you could always thin out canes with the pruning like we're going to do today, and that might help too. So, all right. Anything else?
Is everything we're pruning today summer bearing?
As far as I can tell, yes. Do you know if it's...
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Yeah, because when I came in July, all of the green canes had no fruit. All of the woody canes were starting to have fruit. So,
Yeah.
looks like summer bearing to me. If it is fall bearing, there are a couple tricks you can do as far as pruning. So with fall fruiting, it starts producing at the very top and it works its way down. So I usually recommend the top third or top half. You can prune back. You can also cut it all the way down to the base. So if you're just pruning back the top, you want to go just past the last flower set that bloomed, and you should be able to tell, like here you can see that these are bloomed and spent. So just cut below that, and then the rest should bloom next year in the summer. And then you'll get those first year canes that will bloom in the fall. So you won't get as big of a fall production, but you'll be able to stretch it out. Yeah, so you can do that with fall producing raspberries. With summer ones, I always go through, and there's kind of 4 steps that I do. So first, I go through and I remove anything that is too, like, way out of the zone that I want it to stay in. So if I want it to be right by this trellis and evenly spaced, then this one would be, I'd remove that. I'd probably leave this one, let it grow, but take out anything that goes outside of the zone you want to keep it in. Next, I go through and I cut out all of the spent flora canes, those second year ones that fruited this past summer and are done. They will not do anything, they'll just be dead and get in the way. So I go through and I take out all of those.
Just put them to the ground.
Yep, yeah. I'll just cut them right now to show you. So, but yeah, I usually leave pretty close to the ground. I might leave a couple inches or so, just so I'm not cutting into the crown of the plant, but yeah, you can remove that. And then I go through and I cut out anything that looks like that is dead. It broke really easy, so I could take out anything like that. Because if it's dead, dry, snaps really easy, that's not going to produce fruit. After that, I'll go through and space out everything. So for raspberries, our general recommendation is 4 to 6 plants or canes, 4 to 6 canes every foot of row. And you can even space that out this way too, so you'd only want 4 to 6 across this foot, 4 to 6 across this foot. So every 2 to 3 inches is how far you want to space them. That's just for light penetration. And additionally, some people, even with summer bearing, they'll go back and just clip the tops. And you'll get bigger berries that way, but less berries. So the more canes you have, the more berries you'll have, but the smaller they'll be. So if you want to go for larger berries, you want less canes, and you can even prune them back a little bit if you want to. So yeah, that's the differences. Do you guys have questions about that?
So for this plant right here, are you gonna leave like 10 canes, 12 of those, and get rid of the rest?
Let's see.
Seems like there's a lot in there.
There is a lot. And some of these are pretty big, so I did bring the bigger loppers as well.
A lot of it's already hanging over the sidewalk, so you
Yeah,
tack all that back in.
and it looks like a lot of this is, oh, that one's weed. But yeah, you can tell just anything that has those flower clusters on it. If you're just starting out with raspberry pruning, sometimes I do wait until spring, because that way you can just snap it, and if it's dry, you can cut it back, and it's a lot easier to tell that way. But for this time, let's see. That one looks like it's spent. It's a little bit trickier to tell. I usually look for those flower clusters, and anything that has branched out a lot. So that one has, but yeah, I just thinned this so they were all 2 to 3 inches spaced out.
It seems like a lot of thinning.
It is, yes.
And how do you decide which ones to take out and which ones to leave?
I usually just look at the general health of it. If it looks healthier, then I'll leave it. Let's see. Let's do this one. I'll show you. So you can see a lot of these are white, and those look like, okay, so this one right here, like, still looks pretty white. That looks like it's just barely turning woody. This one is brown, and you can see it's peeling off. So that one's definitely a second year cane.
The white is
Kind of the newer, younger growth that you'll want to leave. But these dark brown ones, like this, that looks like could be at least second year, maybe older to me. And it snaps pretty easy. But yeah, and you can even see flower clusters are forming off these sides. So that one's an older cane as well.
And once a cane has fruit, it'll never have fruit again.
Yeah, I mean,
Unless it's fall bearing.
yes, yeah. So the fall bearing ones, let's say this is a first year fall bearing cane, and I only got this much production before it freezes. So I'm gonna chop off down to, you know, a little bit below, and then next summer it'll start producing here and move downwards.
Okay.
So, but usually second year canes and older won't do anything. They have that 2-year life cycle. Hi. But yeah, does that make
Yes.
sense? Okay. Yeah, but I can just tell these ones are older and ready to come out.
So Megan, can I ask, just reconfirm, 'cause
Yeah.
I think you already told us,
If it is fall bearing, you can cut it all the way to the ground.
Yeah,
Okay.
it makes it so much easier. You can just chop it all back and not
And
worry
you
about
want to
it.
do that in the winter instead of the spring?
You can do it in the spring, but you definitely want to do it before you start getting smaller canes growing up, because if you do chop those back, it could, impact it that way too. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, fall bearing are my favorite because they're so easy to deal with. But yeah, it can be hard to grow them here just with our shorter growing
What's the
season.
yield of chopping all the way back versus actually going through and doing a hand prune where you take canes partially back based off of building?
So your fall yield will be lower because it has put energy into those old canes for fruit production.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if it is lower or if it's just split. I haven't heard that.
Can we
but
chop your bed back in 2 different ways?
go for it. Tell me how it goes. We'll get a final weight
But
of
there's
berry
not one
yields.
way that like if you chop it back versus actually go through and like hand prune down, one way is not like far and away better than the other.
No, yeah, you might get some winter dieback on those fall canes just because they're more susceptible. So depends on the cultivar and the type of winter we have. And then a few cultivars I'd recommend. We'll see if I can remember them. So for blackberry, let's see. I think Apache, Triple Crown. There's a couple others. I can pull up a list. For raspberries, I like Canby. Wow, I can't remember the others off the top of my head. I'll have to look them up in my notebook later. But those are pretty winter hardy. They have high yields and they taste good. So those are usually my 3 recommendations. Is it winter hardy? Will you get good yields or fruit size, whatever you're going for, and taste, of course, because no one wants to eat gross raspberries. So, yeah, but just going through here, I'm just going to remove all of those canes that are brown and have that peeling bark, if I can get a good angle.
Seem like you're right at the ground pretty much.
Yeah, I usually leave like a couple inches, but it's not necessary.
And so, okay. With the summer bearing, do you think now's a good time to prune? This is good?
Yes, yeah. As long as you've lost about half the leaves, it's good. You can wait until spring too. The canes will have died back quite a bit more by then. So,
What would you do? Would you do fall or spring?
I usually wait until spring because I'm sick of gardening by fall. But yeah, there isn't one that's better than the other. I do feel like it is a little bit easier to tell in spring sometimes, just because the older ones have really died back. But yeah, I think just looking at that peeling bark, I don't know if you guys want to take a look at that, but that's what I'm looking for right now. Or anything that has those spent blossoms on it. It's a good sign that it's already gone through 2 years and won't do anything more. So, do we have any other questions?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, oh, you're fine.
So the winter berry, or the fall or winter, they only bloom twice too.
They only have,
They only bear fruit.
yes. So
So
Yeah.
that's why you cut them down, but then you said that you get less of a yield.
yes, so let me see if I can follow this right. So fall bearing produce on first year canes. The only reason we get berries the second year is because it didn't finish fruiting along that cane. It might have froze before then. So they don't necessarily put on new blooms on the top of the cane that's already done fruiting. Does that make sense? It's just kind of a continuation. It's just separated by that cold dormancy
so in a place
period.
more like a zone 8, they would finish all the way through, most
Yeah.
likely, before they
Yeah.
froze, and would always finish their blooms on their first year.
Yeah, and like we did research on raspberries in Logan and we used fall bearing, but we had high tunnels, so we could start them or get them growing early just by heating up the environment so they were able to bloom through. So there's different ways you can, try to promote earlier fruiting for fall bearing, but yeah, just depends how much time and effort you want to put into it. So okay, do you guys want to give it a try? You feel comfortable with it? Or I can show a few more areas.
Do you want to talk about blackberry at all?
Oh, thank you.
Oh, okay. First we'll hear about blackberry.
Yeah, so blackberries, I usually recommend pruning these in winter. We probably won't touch these too much. You can just tell that they're a little more hardy with the cold temperatures. They haven't gone quite dormant yet. These are definitely going dormant and we can cut it out. But with blackberries, what I like to do, I prune twice. So in midwinter, I'll go through and I'll take out any canes that have already fruited. And let's see if I can see any right now. Yeah, you can see that this one is already fruited and it's actually dying back because that might even be like a 3-year-old cane right there. But it's definitely dying back. That one I would definitely take out. For the rest, I actually prune in, let's see, midsummer. I'll go through and with these semi-erect types, I'll actually, let's see, this is the center. You can see this is the main center cane, and then it has all these side ones. So I'll go through, and if it's a semi-erect type, I'll wait until it gets a few inches above my top wire. That could even be like 5 feet up if you want. I think 5 feet is typical, but you can go through, prune it at about 5 feet, and then you can allow these side ones to grow. And a lot of times in winter, people will go back and they'll even cut these back. And that will force just bigger fruit throughout the summer next year. And yeah, you can just train it to the trellis. You can use belling twine to tie it. There's this green, almost stretchy kind of tape that you can use and tie that off around it just to help guide it. So it just keeps it a little bit cleaner.
Where do you get the green stretchy tape?
Ooh,
Cool.
Amazon.
yeah, Amazon.
If you want a big pack of it, you can normally order it in on Amazon because you'll use it for.
It's just
I
called
think
green
so.
stretchy
Yeah.
tape. Green
It's
stretchy
called
tape.
gardener's tape.
Yeah, gardener's
Okay.
tape, yeah. There's a lot of
Wow.
different brands, and you can even get a gun that'll staple it on for you, and you can go all out. But yeah, I like to use that. There's a couple different ways you can trellis. You can have the single level, where you would have to, tape on each one of these. You can also do what's called a T-trellis. And so you'd have a post like this, but then you would have a T across. You could run wires on each side of it at different heights. So you'd basically have this on both sides. That would just keep it upright.
Yeah.
A lot of times with fruit, some of the smaller ones might bend over in the dirt. But yeah, just keeping it organized and upright helps when you're harvesting. Higher fruit quality that isn't, falling in the soil like this one would be. And yeah, just keeps it cleaner and easier to deal with. So yeah, I do the winter pruning, cut back anything dead, and then summer pruning where I will basically tip the plant, whether it's here or at the top while it's growing. So,
What if you trimmed it all now? Is that bad? Just curious. What would happen?
Or like early spring after winter.
yeah, just cut everything back. So there are primocane and floricane fruiting blackberries. So I don't know what kind these are. It was a little bit hard to tell when I visited. I think it's a second year bearing, just like these were. But yeah, if that's the case, if you cut it all back, then you'd have to wait 2 years. But if it is that first year fruiting, then it would be fine. So yeah, it's kind of similar to raspberries, but you prune it a little bit different at different times.
You don't cut it to the ground.
Yeah. They usually just recommend trellising it and doing the method of, dealing with the side ones, and then the new ones that grow up, you can trellis those and tip them back. Even if, so say this is a first year fruiting blackberry, and so it's going to grow up about this tall. Say it hits here, I'm going to cut it back to here.
So it looks like
after
I
that,
have like a
rotate.
couple of those ones coming from the ground,
Yes,
So
yeah.
would you do
this one
all of
looks like a first year to me because it's really green. It hasn't gotten a woody appearance yet. But yeah, I would just, and you could spread them out almost like a fan too, just to keep it organized. It gets a little tough when they're more woody like this, but when they're young, you can really bend them more and it's easier. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So kind of cut all those big ones to right above the trellis.
Yeah, so I
And then
usually cut them back to here.
train the others to go along the trellis.
Yeah, almost like a grapevine if you've seen the grape systems.
Yeah,
Kind of similar concept, so.
but never cut to the ground.
I usually don't. And this one I do think it was that second year fruiting, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I usually just cut out dead canes or spent canes and then let the new ones grow up. So. Okay.
You don't need to like space them like the raspberry canes.
You could thin it out. I think I've seen at least like 7 canes that are spread out from each plant, but it's not quite the same as raspberries. So
You don't need
they
to
can
thin them.
handle a little bit more. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay. Any other questions?
So where you're trying to clean it up, do you have to dig everything out? You can't just mow those down because they'll just come back, right?
So I like to maintain this all year round. I like to use a hoe or a shuffle hoe, and I'll just chop them back kind of below the soil level. But I'm not taking out all of the roots at the same time. So the plant still has some roots, but
Just keep
Yeah.
making it hard on them.
yeah, and usually when they're younger and small, they'll be just that, you know,
It's like a soft little sheet.
yes, yeah.
But so
Trying to think of a word. So they'll be just like shorter, green, and soft, and you can just cut them back really easy. So, yeah.
But you can also, can't you dig this out and give it to someone as
Yeah.
a start?
Yeah, you can. The one thing we do caution, anytime you're sharing plants, if you do have a disease or an insect that's in there, you are, you know, sharing that problem too. So, yeah, if you want to take the chance, go ahead.
Aren't you basically taking a chance every time you go to a nursery and buy a
So there's a lot of regulations where they have to check for viruses and diseases and things. If they do have issues, they lose a lot of customers. So they usually start with really clean stock. Yeah, and they usually know to look for those issues and things like that too. So it is a little bit safer. There, you might still have issues, but generally it's going to be a cleaner plant to start with.
If you
So,
do share close to you, so you don't spread
yeah.
Yeah.
your little
Across
pests.
state
Yes. Yeah, and
to other
We don't love
countries.
pests spreading.
yeah.
So okay, so if we were gonna give this to someone to transplant,
Yeah.
is now a good time, or does it matter
you
when
could do it in fall or spring. I wouldn't do it in summer. It's usually a little too hot right then. But using plants that have gone dormant is great. I usually recommend like at least 3 to 4 weeks before the soil freezes. So right now would still be a good time, I would think. So
And you just do like 2 inches below the soil, maybe, or what do you think? Just get what you can,
I might see if I can.
and then give it to someone, and they just put it in the ground.
Yeah, and you could try it for sure. I would dig at least like 6 inches just to see how far the root has gone down, but they're usually pretty shallow rooted. So
Okay.
you'll just want to chop it off, you know, a few inches away so you get enough root length on it.
For someone to
Yeah.
plant.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Or spring.
Or spring. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, but bare root plants are usually a little bit cheaper. It's easier to get what you want. You can pre-order all those different things. So I usually do bare root versus containerized. So.
Good to know.
So on those, is it marked kind of the depth that you would, or is the root pretty obvious where how deep you would?
So anytime you're buying bare root, we usually recommend, you can see like a soil line on the plant, and I usually just follow that soil line. Yeah, that's the safest. But yeah, raspberries will definitely have that soil line. Something like peonies would too. So yeah, great questions.
Great.
Okay,
Should try it.
you guys want to try some pruning?
Yes, that's the idea.
You'll have to let us know how we do next year.
Okay,
He's like, you ruined my garden.
come check it out in the summer. See how it looks.
But yeah, something like this, you can see it has a lot of those side branches that have produced those fruit. And that one's definitely ready to come out. And the wood looks a lot older. You can see the comparison of this newer one with the old